Okay, I'll start now. So just good morning everyone. Welcome to this webinar on the tracker number 5. I'm your host, Bruce Chalmers. This morning we're going to be using the GoToMeeting hosted session. You can open and close the panel by using this button on the side and expand it later if you wish. There's also an option in there for full screen or window mode if you want to see a better view of the presentation. By default, everyone is muted. And there's an option to input questions into the GoToMeeting box, which we'll cover at the end of the session. We will also record today's session and upload the webinar to our website, hopefully within 24 hours. So the agenda for today is just to give you a short introduction on data management and Blueback, cover what's new in the tracker number 5, a quick demo of the new features, and hopefully have some time for some Q&A at the end. I think I have a question here. Okay, 1 second. I don't see it. Well, so welcome everyone, and just want to start by giving you a quick update on everything data management from Blueback. So as of today, we have more than 100 tracker sites across 48 different companies. We have an annual user group meeting for the tracker. This year will be in London in May, and this is quite a good forum for Petrel data management in general. The tracker number 5, which we recently released, included a significant update to the Spatial extension through the addition of a Query Manager module. And the tracker number 5 also added support for the Studio E&P knowledge environment. Earlier in the year, we also had the first release of the Blueback System Center, which is a new product. So just to summarize, if you're not familiar with our 3 products we have, inside of Petrel we have a data management toolbox for loading and merging seismic, etc. Then we have the tracker, which is for giving an overview of the Petrel projects and the data within the projects, and is used to produce various reports and do various data QC. And we then have the Blueback System Center, which is more designed around collecting information about the Petrel use, the computers, the Petrel license use, etc. You'll find information about all these products and hopefully today's webinar later today on our media center. So if you go to bluebackreservoir.com and then look for media center, you'll find links to all the documentation and media from various products. So quickly, what we're going to cover in this presentation is basically the new features from the tracker number 5. So firstly, this is tracking data from Studio E&P knowledge environment. So the tracker collects the data sync status against Studio, collects the quality attributes from the projects, and supports Studio in our business rules and measurements modules. We'll also cover the Spatial Query Manager, which is a new module to help with the Spatial extension. I'm also going to show a little bit about Compare Projects tool, which came in late in tracker number 4, so it's quite new as well. Tracker number 5 also has some general improvements, which we always try and do. The first is to notify when a scan is complete. So if you're making use of the notifications engine, which is an email system in the tracker admin, you can get a notification when your tracking tasks are completed. And we also made a significant performance improvement to the seismic duplicate analysis process, so that should save a lot of time when you're doing your various tracking jobs. So let's just dig into those features now. So to show what we've been doing, I just first want to show this view here, which is the projects and the data view from inside the tracker web. So this is the bread and butter of the tracker. We can see all our projects and see how the data is synchronized between the different projects, and it uses this traffic light system from Petrel to do that. So here you can see where projects have taken data from the reference projects and whether it's equal or older or newer. So the tracker number 5 of course does that, but in addition it also factors in a Studio database. So you can see which projects have taken data from a Studio database and what the data sync status is, i.e. if it's older or newer or equal. So this lets you see how the Studio data has come into the projects, where it belongs and where it needs to be updated. How does this work? Well, in your tracker admin tool, you'll find a new tab called Studio for Petrel. In there you can specify a Studio connection, and then it should pick up the different repositories that belong to a specific connection, and you can choose whether or not to include them in the analysis or not. And then, as I mentioned before, once it scans, it'll check also the data sync status between the reference projects and the working projects, and Studio and the working projects. So this is a really useful way to get that overview of both reference projects and Studio databases. As you start to move towards Studio and you're going to have some legacy reference projects for a while, this will let you see how the data is handled between those two areas in that phase. In addition, in the tracker web, the first tab is projects, the second tab is data view, where you can view the individual data items. Here we added support by collecting the quality attributes for the data, which also belong to Studio. So you can, for example, see the Studio sync status, confidence level, critical update, data status, and business project. And the idea here is you'll be able to query for certain quality attributes, like find me all the data that is flagged as a critical update, and you can identify data that's a critical update and make sure that's been transferred back to Studio. We also added a new module in the tracker web, which is the Studio browser, and what you see here is a list of the different Studio repositories. So this is like a kind of in a way a reference project, but in a Studio database. So you'd have many repositories representing different business areas, projects, etc. And then what you can do is you can browse the Petrel projects which are using this Studio repository as a source. So this lets you see a kind of parent-child relationship between the Studio database and your working projects. And again, you can dig into the data that's come from Studio and make sure that it's synchronized and up to date. In addition, you can view the data in the projects that come from a specific Studio source, and this helps you understand how the data is being dispersed into the different projects. So it's just a kind of different way of viewing how the data comes in from Studio and where it ends up and if it's up to date or not. As you know from before, the tracker collects some key measurements every time it scans about data counts, project versions, etc., which you can use to monitor changes over time. So in the tracker number 5, we also included some key measurements from Studio in this. So in my example here, I can count the number of wells that I have, the number of unique wells, and the number of wells from Studio. So I can kind of monitor as I move to Studio how much data is coming in and how much sort of growth you have in data from Studio. So you can make sure that people are picking up wells from the correct Studio database and make sure that that's increasing over time. Again, in previous versions of the tracker, we had the business rules, which check specific elements of the project and alert data managers to, absence of a coordinate system or projects containing lots of duplicated seismic. So in the tracker number 5, we also added some rules around Studio. So you can flag any projects that haven't imported their wells from a Studio repository or haven't got their seismic from Studio, to make sure that any projects which don't do that are sort of flagged. And this is done through the notifications system. So what you can do is set up your Outlook host, and you can choose to email certain data managers or even users about any rules that are being broken. And the idea with this is that it runs on a specific time constraint. So you could run it for projects created in the last 7 days or last 14 days, with the idea being that as people are creating new projects, they're not creating projects with mistakes like wrong CRS or not getting their wells from reference projects, and it ensures that people don't go down a path that's will become too difficult to fix later on. So it's really about real-time monitoring in a way of what people are doing as they start to create new projects. So here we can, for example, get a report of the business rules in an email that have been broken. So this user, Bruce here, his projects are containing duplicated seismic, and this one doesn't have a coordinate system. In addition, we can also check for Studio rules. So Bruce is creating these new projects and he's not getting his wells from Studio, so I need to make sure that he knows where the most up-to-date data is. In addition, for projects that aren't in that time window of the last 7 days or last 14 days, well, you can view them in the Tracker web. So this is where you can check if the legacy projects are using the right CRS or getting the wells in the right place. Now just moving backwards a little bit, this compare projects tool came with a later version of the Tracker number 4. So this tool is available in the network graph part of the Tracker, and it becomes available when you use the control key to multi-select 2 projects. So I can click on these 2 projects here, and then I right-click to reveal this menu, and I get this compare selected projects options. And this lets you do basically 3 things. It lets you see, compare the project overview, which is to check the pet file owner, the CRS, and the units, etc., to make sure they're consistent between the 2 projects. And then the second part is to check the individual data items within those 2 projects. So there you can see which project has unique data, which project has common data, and how the 2 relate in terms of time. So project 2 might have all the data from project 1, but it may have modified certain objects, and you might want to identify what they are. So just moving quickly on to the enhancements to the spatial extension in the Tracker number 5. We added another module into the Tracker admin, called the Spatial Query Manager, and this tool is designed to crop down the query layers from the Tracker to help make maps a bit easier to work with in ArcGIS. So this basically filters down your database on the basis of 3 elements. So the first is to choose an area of interest from the map. So this lets you define a box or polygon to restrict the view in a map. Then you choose the data type that you wish to use. So that could be 2D, 3D interpretation, 2D, 3D seismic, wells, project outlines, etc. And the final element you can choose when you create your view is project tags. So these tags are stamps that we give to projects inside of the Tracker web, and this can make this map building process really interactive. So I can go to my Tracker web and stamp a number of projects like Bruce's projects or new partner projects, come into the Tracker Query Manager, select a data type and select my new tag, and then create a view of only those projects. And this is also useful for comparing between reference and working projects for data QC purposes. So just to show a couple of examples of what you can do, in this example here I made a layer of wells, or 3 layers of wells, one in green from my mid-Norway reference projects, one in blue from my Southern Norway reference projects, and then a layer in red of all the wells from the working projects. And this lets me see where the overlap between the two different data sources are, and then overlay where the users have their data to make sure that that's consistent. In addition, if you just want to browse a certain area of interest for any available data, if you're working in a kind of exploration type setting where you want to see if any data exists or any interpretation has been done, you can just use the query editor to help define a small area of interest and grab some specific data within that area. So I wanted to find out here if I had any 2D seismic in this general region, and I used the tracker to build a map of whatever data was available. Finally, this is the kind of bread and the butter of the spatial extension. This process makes it easier to compare our Petrel data with other sources. So in this example here, I've grabbed my wells in a certain area around mid-Norway, and I've colored them in green. So these are the wells from my reference projects. I've then loaded in black the WMS of the Norwegian NPD, which shows where all the publicly available wells are. And by comparing the two, I can see, well, at least my data is accurate. I have a good match between the public wells and my reference projects. But down in the lower left part of the section here, I'm missing some publicly available wells that I may want to get. So now let's just go through these features in the demo. So I'm just going to open up my tracker web here. So the first thing I'm going to show is the support for Studio. So in this projects view here, I get a view of my projects, and I can change it, for example, to show me how data is coming from the reference projects and how the projects are keeping up to date with certain data. So here I can sort it for the wells, for example. So in addition to the reference projects, we now also support Studio. So here, same thing, I can see how my wells are coming from Studio, which projects are using them, and which may have data that needs updated. So here I have some projects which have wells which are older than what's available in Studio, and they probably need to go and refresh the data in their project. In addition, if we come into the second view, which is the project data view, we now see that we have the list of the different data items, and we now also have the Studio quality attributes, which are confidence level, critical update, etc., etc. We can filter on these things, so let's say list only the data which has critical update set to true, and I can find my project which has Studio critical updates flagged in them, and I can make sure that they've been written back to the Studio database. Next is the Studio repositories browser. So this lists your Studio repositories here on the left and can identify the projects which are using that Studio repository and also the data that's coming from that Studio repository. So it's a kind of filter into the Studio world. So if I jump in here to the projects, for example, and then I change to my Studio references, I can see how many projects are using this source, that's many, and how the data is being updated or not. In addition, I can also browse the individual data items that come from this Studio repository, and you can see where it ends up. So I should see a lot of copies of the same item coming from Studio, and I can identify the projects which have a sort of out of sync data item from Studio. In addition, just to show that we've fully supported Studio in this first version, I'm here showing a couple of different measurements. I'm going to show my total number of wells from Studio, and then maybe also my unique wells. And these are 3 measurements which the tracker has collected over time. So we can see that I have a significant number of wells in my projects and that many of them are indeed correctly synchronized. And I can see now that I'm starting to use Petrel Studio as a source for the wells, and I can watch how this changes over time and make sure that it's increasing and catching up with the wells that are coming from the reference project to show that the Studio implementation is being used by the end users. Next, I want to show you the data compare tool. So I've come in here to the project networks graph, and I can choose these 2 projects by holding the control key. Then I can right click and I can say compare selected projects. So the first element of this view is to compare, for example, the CRSs of each of those projects, the owner, etc., when it was last modified, to get an idea of the origin of this project. And then secondly, we can compare the state of the data between the 2 projects. So we have these 2 columns, unique data and common data. So common data is, of course, the data which is shared between the 2 projects, and we can see that there's a significant amount of data that's shared, but most of it has all been modified in the second project, meaning that the second project is generally a more up-to-date version of this project. However, we do see that there's some unique data to project 1 which has not been copied over to project 2. In this case, it's a set of model properties. We can see that it's only 1 model. So I know that if I can go and collect this model from project 1 and put it into project 2, I have the most up-to-date information from both projects, and I can probably get rid of or demobilize project 1 and keep project 2 as a master copy from then on. Next thing I'm going to show you is to jump into the tracker admin to show you the changes there. So here we go. Just close this. So the first thing to show here is that in the scanning data, the configuration setup rather, I have this Studio for Petrel tab. So in here I can define my Studio connections, which are like database and hostname, and the tracker will check to find the various repositories within that database, and I can choose to include them in the analysis or not. And in your analysis tab you'll see this button, Analyze Studio for Petrel. So that's how it collects the information about Studio, or rather that's how it fits into the tracker process. The next thing to show is the Spatial Query Manager, which is a tool for building these subset queries for use in ArcGIS. We can change here whatever base map we want to use, including a user-defined one. So if you have an internal web map service you want to use as your background, you can do that. And then I'm just going to hide my other layers I've already created. By zooming in a little bit, I can say draw edit polygon, and I can choose a specific area of interest, for example down here, and in this case I'm going to look for some seismic cubes, and by clicking this load spatial data I can get a preview of any cubes I have in this area. So I see that I have roughly 3 clusters of data here, but perhaps I'm only interested in this small area, so I'm going to refine my polygon a bit and set it to here. So I'm happy with that. I've found validated that there will be data in my view and that it's seismic cubes. So the next part is to choose a relevant tag. So I'm going to choose my local projects and my working projects as a tag, and then I should give it a relevant name. So local projects seismic cubes, and then I simply press create the view. And then when I come over to ArcGIS, in the same way as it worked before, you can say file, add data, add query layer, and then under my connection I choose, of course, the tracker database. I then browse to the bottom and I'll find my user extension queries, and here I'll find my local project seismic. Select that query, local seismic, press finish. For example, and then I can find my specific seismic cubes that I've chosen in that area. And if I open the attribute table, I see that I have a rather limited selection of data. So the whole idea of the query manager is to really drop down the views so that they become a lot easier to work with in ArcGIS. So if I zoom to layer, for example, I've got a nice constrained view around my seismic cubes, and that my attribute table is quite small and easy to work with. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit more to show you some additional features. So in this area here, I can zoom in a little bit. I have made a query from my wells from the Barents Sea projects, and I've made them green in color. I can come in, of course, and adjust the size of the labels, for example, make them a bit bigger. And then what I've done is brought in the fact map from the NPD, and if I turn that on, I can now display all the public wells. So I can see here that I have some reference data up in this area. I've got a nice match with the well positions here over this field in my reference projects, but I'm missing a certain number of wells from other areas which I may want to include in my reference projects. So that's the whole idea of the spatial extension, is to use it to compare multiple sources of data together. In this case, it's my reference projects against the NPD fact map, but by using the SQL Query Manager, you can also then make a comparison of different groups of projects together. So if you have a situation where you have an office with a headquarters and then you have a regional office also doing work as well, and you need to QC the overlap of data between the two, this is a really good way to do that, because you can make a layer of the two different sources of data. Also, in the scenario where you're working with a lot of partners and you want to make sure you've all got everything in the same place, again, this can be used to build up this layers of different sets of projects, and then add in some official quality control data like a government layer or another GIS data source. So finally, for any more information, contact us on support or through sales. You'll find some basic information on the Ocean Store, and you can also download an evaluation of the tracker from the Ocean Store. I'm now going to see if we have any questions in the dialogue. Let me see. I have something here. It's just a good morning. Okay. So it doesn't appear to be any questions as part of the demonstration. So just thanks for listening. And if you do have any questions that come to mind, then please get in touch. We'll send out an email to notify you all when the webinar has been uploaded to the web. Oh, we have a question now. Let me just minimize that. To have stamps in the database. We have a question asking if it's possible to have stamps in the database. I think that's what we do through the use of our tags. So in the tracker web, we can apply tags to certain groups of projects. For example, here, my working projects on this Jura asset, I can tag them with a specific name, and we can use that in the tracker itself to filter the data, or also in the query manager. Okay, I think that's all the time we have planned for today, so thanks again, and we'll forward the webinar when it becomes available online. Bye.